Okay, malpractice concerns. Now, I will tell you that I work part of my life, and have for the last 8 years, at the malpractice company that insures all of the Harvard hospitals and most of their surgeons. I look at every single surgical malpractice case. So I have a pretty good sense of why patients sue and what they sue for, and a pretty good idea of how the checklist might stand in a court of law. And I can tell you that the case law around using checklists is pretty thin, that hospitals and physicians have not been taken to court very often about anything to do with the checklist. And when a checklist has been brought up, it's been used in most of the cases that I'm aware of as part of the defense. And it's been used as proof by the physician or the hospital that certain processes were thought about and completed. So the checklist can be very helpful in that way. Now, I think one of the things that you need to think about when you make your checklist is to not put things on the checklist that you don't think are important enough to actually do. Because by creating the checklist as a document, you are setting a standard for yourself. For most of us, when we look at that checklist, every single standard that's on there already is something that we already do. There aren't a bunch of new standards that are put on that checklist. In that case, the checklist really can only help us. If we didn't do something that's on the checklist, then we didn't do it whether the checklist was there or not. And that's the fact that gets us in trouble legally. It's not whether the checklist shows that it was done or not. Again, documentation, obviously important in a court of law. How you choose to document it then is a way of deciding how you want to handle that risk. But generally speaking, a checklist can keep you out of trouble, not get you into trouble if things don't go the way they're supposed to. Now, I can tell you a teeny little story about a person who I used to do surgery with in another life. And that is that in his particular case, the checklist turned out to be very useful for them as a tool that proved that they checked to make sure they had the right implant, and indeed they had it. Because the suit was about whether the implant was the right size or not. They could prove that they had considered that they had checked for it, and the reason why they put what they put in was because that's what they thought the patient needed, and they won the lawsuit. Now, obviously, none of us can guarantee that every lawsuit is going to be won no matter what tools we use, but malpractice shouldn't be high on your list of things that the checklist is going to cause. It's much more likely to be useful in terms of defending things. So I don't want to end the call talking about something depressing like malpractice, although I think really it is a very favorable way of looking at how the checklist can be helpful. But I do want to leave you with a thought, and that is what's on the screen right now. And it's something about the checklist that I don't know that we always think about. And that is that if we all can do this, if we can do what Jim talked about at the very beginning and put this tool effectively into place in South Carolina operating rooms, we're never going to know which patient the checklist helped. Because a lot of times, the information that got shared because we used it and the problems that were prevented, we'll never know. The problem will never happen. So we won't be able to tie the two things together. But that's a good thing. And as we continue to do this work, we don't want to lose focus of what it's all about. And that is that it's all about the patient and making their care safer